So the big question is, what is critical thinking? Okay. Critical thinking is a process of carefully examining information to make smart decisions. It involves asking questions, analyzing facts, and thinking clearly to understand situations and solve problems. It has become a topic of hot discussion even academically because even companies are starting to realize that due to the rapid changes that are happening in society, technologically, educationally, socially, companies need to act fast in a way that benefits them. And on a personal level, it also allows you to make decisions in your life. I mean, topic module number 1 is about self-growth, self-development. So this also plays into self-reflection, okay? It also plays into self-reflection. I'm going to share a video with you of psychologist Diane Halpern. She's the author of this book, Thoughts and Knowledge, An Introduction to Critical Thinking. On what she's going to talk about on what critical thinking is, how this skill should be taught, and why it is key to thriving in a fast changing world.
Critical thinking is a term that we use. It roughly describes good thinking, clear thinking. It's thinking that's goal-directed. It's the kind of thinking we would use when we're solving a problem, making a decision, deciding whom to trust, what to do, those sorts of things. When you're thinking critically, you're using the particular skills of critical thinking, and you're using them in a way that's going to make it more likely that you're going to get the good outcome that you're looking for. Critical thinking is essential. It's really making decisions based on the best ways we can think. It's avoiding some of our common biases and fallacies. If you look at virtually every school, they claim that in their mission statement they encourage critical thinking. Virtually every university. I think just about every survey of employers says what they want most in the people they're hiring and in their current employees is the ability to think well and to communicate clearly. But you really can't communicate clearly if your thinking is not clear. Muddy thinking will never lead to good communication. So really good thinking is at the heart of everything we're doing. Technology is changing vastly, how the kinds of tasks that we're responsible for. The world is changing very, very rapidly, and the skills and habits that we have today are simply not going to work. It's in a quickly evolving workplace. It's important to teach critical thinking in schools because it really requires very deliberate kinds of instruction. Critical thinking is not something that necessarily happens as a byproduct of our everyday education. Students really need to be able to identify critical thinking skills, to be able to define them, and then know how to use them and when to apply them across a whole variety of situations and domains. So there's a number of skills. Students can learn them, and when they can learn them and apply them appropriately, they'll have better outcomes. There's plenty of room for improvement in how our schools are teaching critical thinking. Certainly everyone believes they're doing it. But if you ask for good definitions of exactly what they're doing, you're going to get a wide range of answers. I think we need to be doing a much better job. The research has shown that when you teach explicitly for thinking skills, and you teach them in a way that will generalize, so that let me give you an idea of what I mean by some of these skills. Some common ones would be, for example, not confusing correlation and cause. Now, almost everyone's going to say that their students know that. But in fact, do the students then recognize it when they're out of school, when they're on the job, when they're reading the newspaper, and apply it appropriately? So they need to be able to label it, identify it, recognize the conditions when it's needed, and then use it. And use it away from school. So if they're reading a newspaper and it says kids who go to preschool are better readers than kids who didn't, do they automatically start thinking, well, it doesn't mean that preschool caused it. It could be a correlation because wealthier kids go to preschool, those sorts of things. So they actually apply it. Other examples might be avoiding hindsight bias. In retrospect, things thought they must have been much more avoidable than in fact they were at the time the decision was made. It could be things like regression to the mean, understanding how that operates across a whole variety of domains. Looking for reasons, looking for evidence that supports a conclusion. Looking for counter evidence, being open, looking at the credibility. There's huge amounts of information available. We're drowning in it, but we have to be able to know what's credible and what's not credible when we're getting our information. So it's a whole list of skills. I have these lists of skills in several of my books. You learn the skill, learn how to generalize it, and learn how to use it in a way that transfers across disciplines and over time. I really specialize in the area of adult critical thinking, teaching it really in the universities and colleges, but also a lot of workplace training as well. There's no reason why it can't be learned. We can always become, for example, better writers. So that skill would transfer to whatever we're writing, better at oral communication, better at math. And similarly, we can always become better at critical thinking. I think that we can always keep improving. And the evidence is that with appropriate instruction, adults can become better critical thinkers. I think it's also important to remember that billions of dollars are spent on quackery, medical claims, on consumer items that are completely worthless, incredible number of scams. And certainly critical thinking skills should help us become much less susceptible to a lot of those lures. Similarly, we really need to have a critical thinking general public, to have a democracy. Irrational thinkers, irrational voters are a threat to all of us. So it's important in citizenship, and it's important in the workplace, and it's important at home.
So that's the introduction about critical thinking. You start to realize how important it is, especially since now with Industry 5.0 and rapid changes that are happening, we really need to be on top of things. So now the question is this. Okay, you heard the introduction, you heard the speech, but you understand the idea. But how do you go about it? Okay. In the next part, I'm going to be sharing with you some more ideas. A video coming from TED Ed, and then I'm going to be showing you different techniques that I have been using over the last 15, 20 years, which I find very, very powerful, very effective. It's a question of mindset, but and a question of discipline on how you go applying these skill sets. Let's begin with the basics. Next up, I have a video from TED Ed on 5 tips on how to improve your critical thinking. Okay. So besides, here you have the title, punch this into YouTube, you will find it. If you don't manage, I can always share the link with you.
Every day, a sea of decisions stretches before us. Some are small and unimportant, but others have a larger impact on our lives. For example, which politician should I vote for? Should I try the latest diet craze? Or will email make me a millionaire? We're bombarded with so many decisions that it's impossible to make a perfect choice every time. But there are many ways to improve our chances, and one particularly effective technique is critical thinking. This is a way of approaching a question that allows us to carefully deconstruct a situation, reveal its hidden issues, such as bias and manipulation, and make the best decision. If the critical part sounds negative, that's because, in a way, it is. Rather than choosing an answer because it feels right, a person who uses critical thinking subjects all available options to scrutiny and skepticism. Using the tools at their disposal, they'll eliminate everything but the most useful and reliable information. There are many different ways of approaching critical thinking, but here's one 5-step process that may help you solve any number of problems. 1. Formulate your question. In other words, know what you're looking for. This isn't always as straightforward as it sounds. For example, if you're deciding whether to try out the newest diet craze, your reasons for doing so may be obscured by other factors, like claims that you'll see results in just 2 weeks. But if you approach the situation with a clear view of what you're actually trying to accomplish by dieting, whether that's weight loss, better nutrition, or having more energy, that'll equip you to sift through this information critically, find what you're looking for, and decide whether the new fad really suits your needs. 2. Gather your information. There's lots of it out there, so having a clear idea of your question will help you determine what's relevant. If you're trying to decide on a diet to improve your nutrition, you may ask an expert for their advice or seek other people's testimonies. Information gathering helps you weigh different options, moving you closer to a decision that meets your goal. 3. Apply the information, something you do by asking critical questions. Facing a decision, ask yourself, what concepts are at work? What assumptions exist? Is my interpretation of the information logically sound? For example, in an email that promises you millions, you should consider, what is shaping my approach to this situation? Do I assume the sender is telling the truth? Based on the evidence, is it logical to assume I'll win any money? 4. Consider the implications. Imagine it's election time, and you've selected a political candidate based on their promise to make it cheaper for drivers to fill up on gas. At first glance, that seems great, but what about the long-term environmental effects? If gasoline use is less restricted by cost, this could also cause a huge surge in air pollution, an unintended consequence that's important to think about. 5. Explore other points of view. Ask yourself why so many people are drawn to the policies of the opposing political candidate. Even if you disagree with everything that candidate says, exploring the full spectrum of viewpoints might explain why some policies that don't seem valid to you appeal to others. This will allow you to explore alternatives, evaluate your own choices, and ultimately help you make more informed decisions. This 5-step process is just one tool, and it certainly won't eradicate difficult decisions from our lives, but it can help us increase the number of positive choices we make. Critical thinking can give us the tools to sift through a sea of information and find what we're looking for. And if enough of us use it, it has the power to make the world a more reasonable place.
Okay, so now we're starting to move towards more of a concrete, realistic approach. Now that is just one video, one 5-step approach, which gives you an idea. Okay. Now what I'm going to be doing next is actually show you 3 other methods. So these 3 tools that I like to use, and I use them not only for meetings or leadership or creating lessons, but I also use them for communication campaigns, for when I write emails, for when I am engaging with clientele, or They are very, very simple techniques. And I've used them also for language learning, for students to learn how to improve their language. It all boils down to the ability on your questioning power. So let's begin with the first one. The first one is called mind mapping. Mind mapping is a simple technique where you have a blank sheet of paper and you put a circle in the middle of the blank sheet of paper, put your main topic, main idea, or your question, and then you start to branch out ideas and you start to collect them and group them accordingly. There are now tools, electronic tools that you can use, and also there are other ways how to go about it. I personally prefer pen to paper because it allows the process of using pen to paper and using different colors. It helps you to scatter your ideas around instead of creating a list. When you create a list, you're boxed in. But having the question in the middle, it allows you to draw, connect, change color, etc., etc. And the process of writing, because you're doing it physically, it allows you to activate your brain power much better. And another thing I do is that I speak my thinking process out loud. Now, obviously, I do this when I'm alone in a room. Okay, I don't shout, but I just speak out loud. Why? Because if you just activate the voice in your head, it stays in your head. But when you speak out loud, you start to activate your ears, and it activates different parts of your mind. And it starts to open up other aspects, other powers that we have. So let me show you some videos so you can get an idea.
Mind maps are a useful tool for summarizing a lot of information in a simple visual form. They are structured to highlight connections between different ideas, issues, and topics. They can be used in several situations. For example, when taking notes during interviews or meetings, and to record the main discussion points during workshops. Let's take a look at how they work. The business system, or problem under consideration, is drawn at the center of the diagram, with the main elements shown as the first level of branches radiating from the central point. Each of these branches is labeled to indicate the nature of the particular area or issue. The label should use as few words as possible, ideally one word. Color can be used to distinguish between different points or areas. Each branch might represent a different aspect of the situation, such as a particular process, service, IT system, team relationship, and so on. The branches lead to second-level branches that are concerned with representing further detail regarding each aspect of the situation. The mind map can be extended to third-level branches and even further if necessary. However, it is important to take care that the mind map doesn't become overcomplicated and the power of the technique is lost. A mind map helps structure the information gathered into a recognizable and manageable set of connections. The mind mapping technique is an extremely useful technique when used to record information and ideas and as a learning aid. Thanks for watching this video. For more videos like this, see our channel or check out our website.
Now I'll show you another video to further help.
Hi everyone, it's Yanis here, and in this video we will explore what is mind mapping. To effectively generate ideas, you have to try out this simple but practical strategy. If this is your first time on this channel, then make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon to get updates on my latest videos about time management and productivity. Mind mapping is the process of representing your thoughts and ideas in a visual mind map concept. It is a visual thinking tool that helps you to structure information, helping you to better analyze it and come up with additional ideas. If you think about it, your brain works the same way. Once you come up with an idea for something, this usually tends to spark off various different ideas. Your brain is constantly mind mapping, but many times it is happening so fast that you don't even realize it. Let's say that you have a birthday coming up, so that will be the central element. Once you think about the birthday, you'll have multiple things to consider. Location, activities, gift, party, then each of these elements have more things that need to be considered. Let's take a look at the party. Here we have to think about food, decorations, and invitations. Food can be then broken down into snacks, main course, drinks, and cake. You can keep going into exact drinks and foods that you'll want to serve. The great thing about mind mapping is that it gives you a visual representation of all the thoughts and ideas, so you can see the bigger picture. If you keep your thoughts in mind, then it's likely that you'll forget about them within a minute. You can create mind maps for anything in your life, be it your relationships, your business, or your next trip to Paris. I hope that you enjoyed this video and I was able to give you a quick summary of what mind mapping is and how you can use it to your advantage. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate if you could press the like button, as this will help the video reach more people and spread the message.
So that is another example of visual. You can use it even for parties. I've actually used it to encourage students to, when it came to language learning, one of the biggest difficulties students have is they know the words, but they can't find them, And when they think of ideas, they only think of one word or two words instead of phrases and emotions and more connecting ideas to that. So it does have its play, and I'll explain it to you how I do it when I teach language or when we're dealing with communication campaign at a later stage in this session. Now I'm going to show you another video, third video on mind mapping, by Tony Buzan. So he's going to go into more technical detail on this.
Do you want to maximize your mind's creative potential and generate brilliant ideas? Tony Buzan is a best-selling author and world-renowned expert on creativity, learning and memory. He has helped millions of people across the world unlock their potential with his intuitive thinking tool, the Mind Map. So, what are mind maps?
These are techniques for thinking that over 40 years and thousands of years of experience and research have been found to be the ways in which we think most effectively. And I studied neurophysiology, I studied psychology, I studied psycholinguistics, I studied pre-medicine, I studied the notes of the great thinkers, and I studied myself, what actually worked for me and what didn't. And over the 40 years evolved the mind map.
Mind maps are easy to create and effective. We start with an eye-catching central image in the middle of a blank page. We then create branches that radiate out from this image and reflect your ideas.
You start a mind map with an image in the center. Why an image? Picture is worth 1,000 words, stimulates memory, stimulates associations, stimulates your thought. From the central image, the second law is main curvilinear branches. These emanate from the central image. Those main branches are curvilinear because thinking is natural, it's organic, and the curvilinear branch attracts the brain more. Those branches, which are called in psychology, in idiomatic language, the BOIs, the basic ordering ideas, are fundamentally the chapter headings of your thought. From those branches emanate, not hanging off the ends, but emanating from the main branches, the BOIs, the chapter headings, emanate the second level ideas. From those, the third level, from those, the fourth level, and very quickly you realize that the mind map as a manifestation of your thought is an infinite thinking process. You can go on adding branches to this branch forever. You can go on adding branches to this branch forever. So the mind map reflects the fact that potentially your thinking, your intelligences are infinitely capable of generation.
Add only one key word to each branch, avoiding phrases or sentences.
Wherever you can, and this should be basically everywhere, one key idea per branch. Why one and not two? Why not a phrase? The reason is that each key idea, each key word, each key image is like a little exploding supernova. So every one radiates out associations. And when you're building a mind map, you want each one of those supernovas of meaning to have the freedom to generate ideas. If you put them in phrases, it's like putting your hand in a cast. You rigidify all the joints, which is what makes your arm and hand such a phenomenally competent tool. Similarly with the mind map, the single word per line rule actually gives you more explosive freedom, more explosive creativity.
To make your map more effective, you should use colour and stimulating images throughout.
The mind map triggers. It uses color instead of monochrome. Colors, plural. Do you like colors? Of course you do. And a color is a thinking tool. It's not some childish thing. Color allows you to order, to discriminate, to code, to highlight, to generate thought, to remember. It's an ultimate thinking tool if used well, and especially in the context of the mind map. Images throughout. Same as for the central image, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you have images throughout your mind map, then you are going to automatically have more powerful memory, more stimulation, more interest, more generative thought.
Mind mapping has been proven to boost your productivity, creativity, memory and comprehension, and can be used for almost anything, from planning and organising tasks to generating ideas and presenting. Visit our website at thinkbusan.com to find out more.
So there you have a very deep concept of how mind mapping works. And at the same time, the way by using your concept in the middle, growing it up, opening up the branches, using different colors, it becomes a work of art. So you're also activating your emotional side, your colorful side, the child within you, your deep thoughts, and it becomes very, very interesting. The only issue I have is that today everyone is on their phone or on their tablet. You can find apps that allow you to mind map on your phone or on your tablet or on your computer. But honestly, going old school and using colors on a sheet of paper in E3 especially, it really brings back some skill sets that we may have forgotten from our childhood. And that is an important lesson to learn, that as adults, we must also go back and find our sense of imagination, our sense of creativity that we may have lost over time because of our adulthood journey and the mundane repetition of the corporate world. Now, what I discovered was mind mapping on its own wasn't good enough if you are of a certain age, because maybe you just don't have the physical skill sets, the imagination, or I don't know, you don't have any creativity and you just don't like using pen and paper. Everything has to be digital, hide behind the email. Well, that's what we're trying to break. So the next level, the next layer I like to add onto a mind map is questioning power. And what you realize, everything is about asking questions. Those who are in power of asking questions are in power of the narrative. They're in power of the discussion topic, okay? And questions demand answers. So what I learned to do was to teach adults to use a mind map and add on the second tool. Now, the funny thing is that we know these words, and in English, they all have the letter W in them. In fact, we call them the W words, okay? And they're so powerful to trigger emotions, to trigger ideas, to lead meetings, to address problems. It's a question of, do you have the discipline to use them, to apply them with yourself and with others? These words are who, what, where, when, how, why, which. So you can use them with yourself, and you can also use them with others. Okay, so let's say we are giving a public speech. We're going to deliver a presentation. We've been invited to deliver a presentation. So the first questions you ask is, okay, who invited us? Why did they invite us? Where is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? Why me? Okay, who's in the audience? What are they expecting to hear? What is the topic is about? When, as in at what time am I delivering? Am I delivering before lunch, after lunch? Because that could have an effect on people's attention, okay? How much time do I have? How long do I have to present? What are the language barriers? What are the culture barriers? What are the challenges involved? Am I on stage? Am I on a podium? Am I sitting down? Am I at a table? You see what I mean? Simple questions that you can ask. And you can do this even for marketing or communication campaign, for example. So, or just simple everyday emails. Who is this for? Who do I need to include in the invitation list? Who needs to be CC'd? Do I need to include everyone? What do I want from the audience? Why am I preparing this email? What do I want to achieve? What are my questions? What is the topic? When do I want them to answer? How should I write this? Okay, so just activating these simple questions can help you be more aware. Now, when you take a mind map, and what I find is that many adults lack imagination power. There are reasons for that. But let's say you're elementary, and I've seen this happen. You're elementary English, A2 English, and you need to prepare either talk about a topic or write an essay about a topic. And your topic is about a famous football player, okay? So the title is Someone I Admire. And you put down a football player, Messi, Ronaldo, one name in the middle. Now, when you look at that word, maybe you can't find the words, but then when you start asking questions, who is Ronaldo? Where is he from? When did he start football? At what age did he start football? Why does he play football? With how many teams has he played football? What are his greatest achievements? What are his darkest moments? What are his moments that inspire me? See what I mean? Just by asking all those questions and firing them off one after the other. And then, of course, you can complicate the questions. What would I ask him if I met him in person? But obviously, that will be a higher level of language ability. But with yourself in your own language, it should be natural as your mother tongue. So the thing is that by asking these questions, okay, you start to become more efficient and proficient in communication. You start to get results quicker, and you realize that some things can be sent, tackled through an email and not have a meeting. Okay, meetings have their place and purpose, but there's always that question: could this meeting have been an email? That kind of thing. But for it to be an email, you have to have structure. You have to have strategy. You have to have a voice in it, not pumping AI, copy paste, and you don't even change enter name here, for example. Okay. So when we start to look at this, we start to realize the true power of questions. And the next video is exactly about that, the power of effective questioning.
Voltaire said, "Judge a man by his questions rather than his answers." And he makes a very good point. It's often said that the quality of your life is defined by the questions you ask, because the quality of the question determines the quality of the answer. So it stands to reason that if you can get better at asking questions, then you can get better answers. Better answers result in a whole host of benefits. For example, being better informed allows you to make better decisions. But being better at answering questions doesn't just mean getting better answers. Obtaining information is just one outcome of questioning. Questions can be used for controlling a conversation. This can be particularly useful during an argument or negotiation. Questions can also be used as a way of showing interest. Showing an interest in other people can help to build relationships, and showing an interest in a subject can open up opportunities to become involved. What's more, questions can be used to explore people's personalities or to diagnose problems, as well as being the common way of testing people's knowledge, such as exam questions. Questions can also be used to encourage further thought or used to emphasize a point. For example, this can be done using a rhetorical question. Finally, ever heard of an icebreaker? Well, questions can be used to encourage a discussion amongst a group and promote conversation amongst people who don't know each other. So it's worth considering how skilled you are at asking questions, because although we all know how to ask a question, do we all know how to do it properly? Questions in their simplest form can either be open or closed. Closed questions are questions which require a short answer, often one word, and chosen from a limited set of possible answers. For example, yes or no questions, or multiple choice questions, or a question to get a specific piece of information. Let's look at some examples of closed questions. Would you like an ice cream? What flavour would you like? How much does it cost? In contrast, open questions allow for much longer responses and therefore potentially more creativity and information. An open question asks the respondent for his or her knowledge, opinion, or feelings about something, and the response is usually more qualitative than quantitative. They usually begin with what, why, or how, but tell me and describe can also be used in the same way. Here are some examples of open questions. Tell me what happened when your ice cream was stolen. Why did you not report it right away? How was your day out at the seaside? There are a few advanced questioning techniques such as leading questions, probing questions, funneling, and rhetorical questions. Let's now take a look at how they work. Simply put, leading questions are where you lead the respondent towards giving you a particular answer which is more favourable to you. For example, if a salesperson asks you, "How many widgets do you want?" then the salesperson has assumed you want some. To answer the question with a number means you've been led to an outcome. However, you must use leading questions with caution because they can be interpreted as rude and manipulative. Probing questions are questions which force the respondent to think more deeply about the information they recall for their answer. For example, if you use a word like exactly in the question, it forces the respondent to be specific. Funneling questions allow you to cleverly funnel the respondent's answers. You do this by asking a series of questions that become more or less restrictive at each step. You start with open questions and end using closed questions, or vice versa. For example, have you been to any good parties recently? What did you do at the party? Was any food provided? Did you eat jelly? The questions in the example become more restrictive, starting with open questions which allow very broad answers, and at each step the questions become more focused and the answers become more restrictive. Rhetorical questions are often characterized by being questions which do not require an answer. Sometimes the question is unanswerable, but usually the answer is obvious. So obvious, in fact, that you wouldn't answer it. It has been asked to demonstrate a point and said for effect. Okay. Do you want to know a secret skill about questioning that is left out of many courses? It's the importance of silence. When you ask a question, no matter how awkward you feel, try to be quiet and let the other person answer. As we've just discussed, unless you're asking a rhetorical question, the purpose of a question is to receive an answer. So be sure to give the respondent the time to answer. And while we are talking about responses, how you interpret the response is equally important to the question. For example, you could ask the best question in the world, but if the answer is a lie or you don't get an answer, what good was the question? Watch out for respondents who only partially answer your questions or stall when responding. Politicians are well known for avoiding the question by giving an unrelated answer, so consider what type of response you are expecting and have a suitable method for making a record of the answer.
So when we start to understand the power of questions, then you start to realize that it can go from a child asking you as a parent, why, to as an adult writing your thesis for your PhD. Because that's what a PhD is all about. You are addressing a gap in research, and from that, you are going to gather data. How are you going to gather data? By asking questions, which are either quantitative, qualitative, etc., which then develops your research paper. Okay, so we start to realize that the power to ask questions, you need to go deep. It has to become a habit. It's not a one-time thing. It's an every time thing. So whenever I'm writing an email, I always activate, lightly, of course. I'm not there sitting contemplating the mystery of the universe. I'm just, okay, who is this for? What do I need to say? What do I want from the respondent? And sometimes you realize you start writing emails, because the biggest problem is we start writing emails. If you remember when I spoke about descriptivism, prescriptivism, descriptivism is more communication connected to your emotions. So when you're out socializing with friends, watching a football game, whatever, at a dinner, you're not there with the points you need to address, you know? Whereas prescriptivism, you think before, it's like going into a meeting or a structured presentation. So what happens is a lot of people today, because everyone's in a rush and no one stops to think for a few seconds, they apply email correspondence from a descriptive approach. They write how they feel it, not what they should be thinking about it. If you take a more prescriptive and you start asking the questions, even with yourself, am I using the right tone, font, color, line spacing? What answers do I need? So what if I need to know these answers? What are the questions to get these answers? Okay, and when you start to, and then what is the order of the questions? Once you learn that structure, that prescriptive approach, that disciplined approach, you start to become more efficient. All right. So, for example, I'll give you a practical example, practical situation. I was in a position in a entity, college, business, where I was responsible for events. So obviously, when someone says, we want to do this, then I'll start asking them, okay, who is this for? Why are we doing this? Who are the key players? Who are the stakeholders? What is the budget? What is the timeline? What do you want in return? What are you expecting from the audience? What is the purpose? You know, so that when you're investing the money, it's not just blown up in there. Oh, we did a stage, we did a concert, we did an exhibition. Okay, you did it, but what is the mileage? What is the return? How many people were affected? How many people were influenced? Did the message get out? Were the people entertained? How many people? Then you start to look at return of investment, like, you know, these things come into play. That's why questioning power is very, very important in leadership, in management, in communication, in dealing with critical thinking, in dealing with emotional intelligence, academically, corporately. So now you have, besides the TED-Ed video on the 5 steps, you also have the idea of using mind maps and the idea of asking questions. The third one is the one that is probably the most, I wouldn't say complicated, I would say, and not even complex, but it is the one that has more depth to it. And what I like about it and what I take pride in is because the person who came up with this idea, unfortunately no longer with us, is Maltese. I am talking about Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats. Okay? 6 hats to control the whole process of emotional intelligence, critical thinking, all in one. So let me share the idea behind it. As you can see, Malta.
In 1985, a Maltese physician called Edward de Bono published a book called 6 Thinking Hats. The book described a powerful technique for looking at decisions from a number of important perspectives. The premise of the method is that the human brain thinks in a number of distinct ways, which can be deliberately challenged. If you look at a problem with the 6 Thinking Hats technique, then you will solve it using all approaches. Your decisions will mix ambition, skill, sensitivity, creativity, and good contingency planning. So, how do you use the tool? You can use 6 Thinking Hats in meetings or on your own. Each thinking hat is a different style of thinking. Let's have a look at what they each mean. When wearing the white hat, you focus on data. Study the information you have on the subject and see what you can learn from it. When you switch to the red hat, you'll look at problems using intuition and emotion, sometimes called gut feeling. Try to think how people will react to your decision emotionally. The black hat has you looking at all the bad points of the decision. This is important as it highlights the weak points in your plan. Switch to positive thinking when wearing the yellow hat. This will help you focus on the benefits of the decision and the value in it. This can be really useful when everything looks gloomy and difficult. The green hat is all about creativity. Let the creative juices flow and develop creative solutions to problems. Finally, the blue hat is about process control. When wearing this hat, you decide which hat is the most suitable for the stage of decision making. For example, if ideas are running dry, you may decide to switch to the green hat. By analysing your decision wearing the 6 different hats we've talked about, you can feel confident about your decision knowing you've considered all points of view.
So the 6 hats is a discipline structured approach to discovering the unimaginable, the unthinkable. The hats all have a purpose, okay? The hats all have a purpose. So you can either go through the process of yourself or everyone at the same time wearing the same hat, or you can have people, depending on their behavioral analysis, their background, their characteristics from the personality test that we spoke about last week, the Big 5, the Greek method, the 4 temperaments, that kind of thing, or prism or disc, that kind of thing, that analysis. You can give that person a specific hat because they'll excel in it. The blue hat actually works as a monitoring system, making sure that we don't dwell on one hat for too long, because if you were to ask people what's positive, they'll probably give you very few answers. If you don't, if you talk about, for example, creativity, you'll find that many people just sit there expecting for the answer to fall out from somewhere instead of them challenging themselves. But if you ask about negativity, oh my God, everyone's going to have a list of 5 or 10 points, It's how we are. I mean, that's what social media, newspapers have been thriving on for the last 200 years, 300 years. Negative news travels fast. Good news, not so much, okay? For every compliment, there are probably 20 complaints at a restaurant, for example. So that's what it's all about.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Big Ideas Growing Minds. We are so happy you are here. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Today's big idea comes from Edward de Bono and his international best-selling book, 6 Thinking Hats. Thinking is the ultimate human resource. In this book, Edward de Bono puts forward a simple process that allows a thinker or a group of thinkers to separate emotions from logic, creativity from information, and allow room for both the positive and the negative. It is called 6 Thinking Hats. The process uses parallel thinking, which can be explained like this. Imagine a beautiful country house. One person is standing in front of the house, one is standing behind. 2 other people are standing on each side of the house. All 4 have different views. All 4 are arguing that the view they are seeing is the correct view of the house. Now the group rejoins at the front of the house and everyone sees the same. They might still disagree if the house is orange or coral, but they are all looking in the same direction and the subject is fully explored. Parallel thinking ensures that everyone is heard and every opinion valued equally. It is not about arguing or trying to win, but about exploring every aspect. The 6 thinking hats each has an easy-to-remember color, and each represents a certain type of thinking. Let's explore them one at a time. The white hat is all about information and is usually used at the beginning of a thinking session. During white hat thinking, everyone focuses objectively, directly, and exclusively on information. What information do we have? What information do we need, and how will we obtain it? What questions need to be asked? The information can range from hard checkable facts to soft information like opinions and feelings. However, be aware that if you express your own feelings, this is red hat. So here it is only suitable to report on opinions and feelings of other people. The red hat legitimizes feelings as an important part of thinking. It gives you an opportunity to express your feelings, emotions, and intuition without any need to explain or justify them. Feelings come in many forms. I love it. I don't like it. I'm worried about. I feel uncertain. Depending on which culture a thinker comes from, the expression of feelings can vary a great deal. A thinker from Japan might say, I feel uncertain, while an American will say, I hate this idea, when trying to express the same feelings. There is no need to explain or justify your feelings. Simply express them as they exist at this particular moment in time. The black hat is the hat for being cautious and careful. It stops us from doing things that are illegal, dangerous, unprofitable, polluting, and so on. It is the hat of survival. In order to survive, we need to know what to avoid and what's not going to work and what is not good for us. Black hat thinking points out if an idea is contradictory or inconsistent, and if it does not match our resources, values, strategy, and so forth. The yellow hat. Think of sunshine. Think of optimism. Under the yellow hat, a thinker deliberately sets out to find whatever benefits that may derive from the suggested idea or plan. Yellow hat thinking is positive and constructive, and under it, we look for the upside and search for benefits. It covers all positive thinking, ranging from the logical and practical at one end to dreams and visions at the other end. The green hat is the energy hat under which new ideas are put forward. Here, options and alternative solutions are laid out. Under the green hat, we seek to modify and improve. Now is the time to go beyond the known, the obvious, and the satisfactory. Everyone is expected to make a creative effort and put forward possibilities. The blue hat is for thinking about thinking. It functions similarly as a conductor of an orchestra guiding the musicians. Using the blue hat at the beginning of a thinking session defines the situation. It lays out what needs to be achieved and defines the agenda and purpose of the session. Typically, the blue hat is worn by the facilitator, chairperson, or leader, and is a permanent role. However, anyone taking part in the thinking session is free to offer blue hat comments and suggestions along the way. It is the responsibility of the person wearing the blue hat to summarize, create overviews, and draw conclusions. The blue hat should always be used both at the beginning and at the end of a thinking session. Benefits of the 6 hats method. The biggest enemy of thinking is complexity, since it leads to confusion. When thinking is clear and simple, it becomes more enjoyable and effective. The Six Hats concept is simple to understand and easy to use. It allows thinkers to deal with one thing at a time, for everyone to get heard and for every aspect to get investigated. And there you have it, Six Thinking Hats by Edward de Bono. We hope you have enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember to give it a like. Take care and see you soon.
So when you think about it, you can actually grab an A3 blank sheet of paper, put your question in the middle to create a mind map, and then draw the six hats, branches, colors, and then apply the questions for each hat. Okay? What data do we, let's say we're approaching through the white hat. So what data do we have? What information do we know? What information don't we have? How can we get it? Where can we get it from? Is it important? Is it relevant? What data is quantitative? What data is qualitative? Okay, so we start looking at these things, all right? So you can see how the three tools now can work together. Now I'll be going to share with you some videos from Edward de Bono himself on the topic of lateral thinking and how he applied it in corporate world, where he became a huge success. A huge success. I actually did a course on Six Thinking Hats about 24 years ago. It was a lovely 2-day event, but it was really, really fun because it just makes you think. It just makes you question things, which is that's what it's all about.
If we look at the human brain as a computer, we then have to ask, what is the software we use with that computer? Well, in general, the software, at least of Western civilization, was originally designed 2,400 years ago by the Greek Gang of Three, the GG3, who were, of course, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. We've done virtually nothing about thinking since then. Creative thinking is a skill. It's not just a matter of individual talent. It's not just a matter of sitting by the river and playing Baroque music and hoping you get inspired. That's very weak stuff. 2,000 years ago, China was way ahead of the West in science and technology. They had rockets and gunpowder and such things. What happened? What happened, the scholars in China started to believe that you could move from certainty to certainty, and as a result, they never developed the possibility system, never developed hypothesis, speculation, imagination. Progress came to a dead end. One of the very important things about creativity is that the new idea, the creative idea, must have value. Far too many people who believe they are creative think that just being different for the sake of being different is creative. It is not, and that is what gets creativity a bad name. So if you look at a door and you say doors are normally rectangular, let's make a triangular door. Now, unless you can show value for that, that is not creativity. That is just being different for the sake of being different. Now, one of the reasons people are reluctant to be creative in general is that if you try out an idea and it doesn't work, that is regarded as a mistake. Now, a big deficiency in language, certainly in the English language, is we don't have a word which says fully justified venture, which for reasons beyond your control did not succeed. So anything which did not succeed is called a mistake, and people don't like mistakes because that stands in the way of their promotion and their career. Provocation is one of the methods of lateral thinking, one of the tools of lateral thinking. It is completely contrary to the opposite of our normal logical thinking. In our normal logical thinking, you can only say things which make sense, which fit our experience and fit in with what we've said before. With a provocation, there may not be a reason for saying something until after you have said it. But because it puts us down in a different position in the patterning system, it allows us to open up new ideas. Thinking outside the box means thinking for unusual ideas, being creative. The notion is that we are all within a certain box which is formed by the constraints, by our expectations, by the concepts we use, by the perceptions we use, and we play around in that box. So thinking outside the box means escaping from, breaking out of the box to change concepts, change perceptions, change constraints, change rules, and develop new ideas. It means developing an idea which would not have been expected in our usual behavior, in our usual thinking. So it's just another term for creative thinking, unusual thinking, or lateral thinking. I prefer the term lateral thinking because that is very specifically defined in system terms, which means moving across from the main pattern to a side pattern, which once you're there, in hindsight, you can link up with your starting point. But thinking outside the box is a general term meaning unusual ideas, ideas which would not have arisen within the box of your usual thinking.
So that's the first video to give you a good idea on creative thinking. And it's funny because he wrote the book back in the 80s, 90s, and popular then. It's only now that all of a sudden universities and critical thinking have become buzzwords. Why? Because of industrial revolution, going to the microchip, and then what we saw in the 90s with the internet, then the mobile phone, emailing, WhatsApp messaging. We're trying to do more in the same time, okay? And what's consequently has happened is that our communication process, our quiet time with ourselves has really shrunk and disappeared. And when we do have quiet time, what do? We indulge in scrolling on TikTok or watching movies or Netflix, for example. When controlled, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that emailing, WhatsApp, texting has become very disruptive technologies in human behavior. Okay, and now we have AI, and what you're seeing is people just because it's a novelty, hooking in, punching in an email, write me an email so I can ask about blah blah blah, and it's very generic, very vague, very bland, and they just copy paste it. They don't even check the language. Why? How do I know this? Because then you see in brackets, insert your name here, insert the client's name here, and they don't even change that. So that's why critical thinking is seriously being given a lot of attention, because we as a society have become more and more, our brain activity has become much less. But those who do, then they have the opportunities. So this is now Edward de Bono is going to give an interview. He's been interviewed about applying his lateral thinking. Because it's one thing to write a book and say we have 6 hats, fantastic. But what about applying it into the business world?
Bevo.com.
Dr. de Bono, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs that are just launching their businesses now? Is this a really bad time to launch?
Well, there's different types of entrepreneur. There's entrepreneurs who say, I'm going to do what other people are doing, but I'm going to do it cheaper or better or something. There are entrepreneurs who say, here's a really new idea, and I believe I can make it work. And there's entrepreneurs who say, I'm going to do the same as everyone else does, but I'm going to do it in a part of the world or country where they're not doing it. And different things. In other words, for some of them, there's a need for the new idea. For others, no, there's a need more for competence, energy, determination. I once wrote a book on, it's called Tactics, on interviews with very successful people. And the 2 things which came out of it, because some of them were tough people, some of them were shy people, some of them were ruthless, some of them were sensitive. One is single-minded determination, and the other is expectation that you would succeed, you would get there. Not expectation that it would just happen to you, but that you would get there. Like a mountain, yes, I shall climb it. So single-minded determination and expectation, you would get there, and every little blip or problem or ditch on the way was there to be crossed. Those are the two things which came. These are very successful people who've made it, yes.
Yeah, I read that book, Tactics, and it's a brilliant book. In the book, you say there's sort of 4 key areas that will most likely generate into success, and you mentioned those to be lucky, a little mad, talent, and a rapid growth field. So I understand 3 of those areas, but could you just tell us a little bit about the a little mad? What's that all about?
Well, you see, when you do something which is different from the way other people do it, or look at it differently, then by definition you are mad. If you prove that your madness works, then they have other adjectives. But at first, it's mad. I mean, similarly with my lateral thinking. If provocation, where you say something which sounds absolutely impossible, I'll give you an example. I was talking to the ecology group in California, about 700 people, and they said we have a problem with rivers and factories on the river put out pollution and people downstream suffer. So using provocation, and the word I invented, PO, provocative operation, PO the factories downstream of itself. It sounds pretty mad. How can it be at A and B at the same time? From it comes a very simple idea that we legislate that when you build a factory on the river, your input must be downstream of your own output. So you're the first to get your pollution, have to be concerned in cleaning it up. And I'm told, I don't know how true it is, that's now been become legislation in 30 countries. Very obvious. But at first it sounds mad. How can it be downstream of itself? Another one really is what sounds very mad, and I was talking about this to Boeing engineers. A plane should land upside down. Sounds mad. I mean, how can you possibly get anything useful out of that? Well, plane lands upside down, the wings give you downward thrust. So from that we get the idea. You have a normal plane and you have 2 small winglets upside down, which give you downward thrust. Now what's the value of that? The value is you have a negative bias. And if you need extra lift in an emergency, you just cancel those winglets by flapping them up or retracting them. And instantly you get extra lift. And 70% of air crashes are caused by the inability to switch on lift instantly. And here you have a way of doing it. So from starting with a plane landing upside down, ending up with a very interesting idea.
Bevo.com.
Okay, so that gives you a good idea about what I mean by applying theory into practice. Now, the third video that I'm going to show you of Edward de Bono, he's on stage, and he's actually going to start to apply lateral thinking and give you further examples.
One of the world's leading authorities on creative thinking. So without further ado, over to you, Edward.
Most of you will have been persuaded or informed, let's say, that climate change is the biggest problem facing humanity. That's not true. The biggest problem is our poor thinking. Now, there's only one problem bigger than that, which is that we don't realize that our thinking is not as good as we believe it to be. Now, why is that so? There are a number of reasons. The first reason is how the mind actually works. One day a fellow gets up in the morning and he has 11 pieces of clothing to put on. So he sets his computer to work out in how many ways he could get dressed. Computer takes 40 hours non-stop processing. That's not surprising, because 11 pieces of clothing, you actually have 39,916,800 ways of getting dressed. The maths are very simple. It's 11 times 10 times 9 times 8 and so on. If you were to try one way every minute of your waking life, you would need to live to be 76 years old, doing nothing else at all except trying ways of getting dressed. Now, that wouldn't be very convenient. Fortunately for us, the brain doesn't work like that. The brain is designed, indeed the whole purpose of the brain is designed to allow incoming information to organize itself as routine patterns. That is the purpose for the brain. So we set up the pattern, we recognize that this is a getting up pattern, and we just go through it. And that's how we manage to survive in life. That is how language works, because language, you have a word, and a word opens up a pattern. And that is excellent, and so on. I described this all in 1969 in a book called The Mechanism of Mind. The leading physicist in the world, Professor Murray Gell-Mann, who got his Nobel Prize for discovering the quark, read the book, was very enthusiastic. He commissioned a team of top computer programmers to simulate what was said in the book and said, yes, it works exactly as you predict. And he's been a great supporter ever since. So that's the way the brain works, forming patterns, using patterns. Then let's look at another aspect. Imagine a doctor in a clinic, and a patient comes in. The doctor takes the history, examines the patient, does some tests. What is the doctor trying to do? The doctor is trying to identify a standard illness, a standard situation, and once you identify the standard situation, you provide the standard treatment. And I would say 96% of all our thinking is of that sort. Analyze the situation, identify what it is, what it's made up of, and then apply the standard answer. Nothing wrong with that, it's highly effective, but it's not quite enough. Then we come to another reason, which goes back to the history of the human race. Now, when Greek thinking came into Europe at the time of the Renaissance, schools, universities, and thinking were in the hands of the church. The church did not need creative thinking. The church did not need design thinking. The church did not need perceptual thinking. What the church did need was truth, logic, and argument with which to prove heretics wrong. So we developed a very good thinking system for finding the truth. And that has stood us very well indeed in science, technology, and so on. What we have never done culturally, we have never developed thinking for creating value. To be sure, individuals, innovators, inventors, entrepreneurs have done that, but culturally it's not there in education. Thinking for creating value. That's a big difference. In fact, it was even worse with the church, because when the church was arguing, it would start with certain dogma, certain articles of faith, like God is omnipotent and so on. And if you start with fixed positions, logic is indeed sufficient to reach a conclusion. But in real life, we do not start with fixed positions. In real life, we start with perceptions. And no matter how good your logic is, if your perception is inadequate or faulty, the answer will be rubbish. Indeed, research at Harvard by a friend of mine, David Perkins, shows that 90% of the errors of thinking are not errors of logic at all, they're errors of perception. But this didn't matter for the church because they started with fixed dogma. So we developed thinking based on our patterns, routines, logic, and so on, which is excellent, but not enough. And that's why some time ago, and I mentioned it yesterday, I had to invent a new word. The new word is EBNER. EBNER means excellent,
but not enough. So something may be excellent, but not enough. There may be a chef who cooks the most fantastic omelette. That is excellent. You can't say it's wrong, but it's not enough. So our existing thinking is excellent, but not enough. It's rather like saying a circular saw is excellent for what it's supposed to do, but not very good for cleaning your teeth. In other words, our existing system is very good for looking at what is, but not very good for creating what can be, which is where creativity comes in. So culturally, we've never done anything about that. If you start from fixed positions, fine. So we need to develop, or not develop, add, because our existing thing is excellent, but we need to add the ability to design and to create. Design is very basic. Design means putting together what you have to deliver the values you want. And I believe that at school, every child, every week should have a design project, whatever it is, and work on it. I used to run, I think I mentioned it yesterday, a design program in an education magazine, and would set a task every week, and the children would make a drawing, using drawings always. Of designs, and one of the exercises was the dog exercising machine, and most of the youngsters would have a treadmill, and the dog running on the treadmill, and a bone hanging at the end to motivate the dog. But one child, age 4, had a different idea. His dog was towing by means of a string harness, a little trolley, and on the trolley was a car battery, from which emerged an electrified prong. And he said, if the dog stops, the trolley will run into him, make him go again. Everyone else was trying to make the dog exercise. This kid said, no, let's prevent him stopping. And design, a very key part of thinking, very neglected. So we have excellent thinking, but not for design, not for creativity. There's no magic about creativity. The brain for creative thinking, the brain forms patterns. Now, all patterns are asymmetric. What does that mean? It means you go from A to B, but you can also go from C to A, but not from A to C. That's asymmetry of patterns. All patterning systems are asymmetric. Now, that gives rise to humor, which is by far the most significant behavior of the human mind. Reason is not particularly significant. Any sorting system run backwards is a reasoning system. Humor depends on asymmetric patterns. You go along here, you get taken here, it makes sense. Typical example I use is old man of 90 dies, goes down to hell. He sees a friend of his, also age 90, sitting there with a beautiful young blonde sitting on his knee. So he says to his friend, are you sure this is hell? Because you seem to be having rather a good time. The friend looks up, says, no, he says, it's hell all right. He said, I'm the punishment for her. In other words, once you make the jump, totally logical. Another example, a typical blonde joke. Blonde finds a soul bottle, takes the top off, out comes a genie dressed as a belly dancer, and says to the blonde, you have released me after hundreds of years in the bottle. I must grant you one of 3 wishes. You can be very rich, very wise, or a great belly dancer. Without any hesitation, the blonde says, I want to be very wise. Next day, she's having lunch with her friends. She says, you know, today I'm so wise, I realize I made the worst of 3 possible choices. Now, exactly the same process happens with creativity. Creativity, we're here, we get taken here. Once we're there in hindsight, totally logical and value in hindsight. There's nothing mysterious, nothing magical about it. There are various techniques for doing it. I'll just very, very quickly mention them. One of them is very simple. You're going along, and you put a block on that. We call that challenge. Challenge is never an attack. challenge says this is an excellent idea, maybe the best idea, maybe the only idea, but for the moment, I'm going to put a block on it, and as a result, start looking elsewhere. Give you an example. 1970, I was doing work for Shell Oil in London, and I said, when you drill an oil well, you drill an oil well straight down and have done so for 8 years. No problem, very satisfactory, works well. I said, let's challenge that. Instead of drilling the well straight down, why not go down to the oil seam and go horizontally? They said, we can't do that, the drill won't go around the corner. I said, yes, it will. If you use a hydraulic head, you pull it round. Today, almost every oil well is drilled like that because you get between 6 and 3 times as much oil from this oil well as from that oil well. Indeed, Statoil in Norway has one well going 10 kilometers horizontally. But for 80 years, everyone is very happy with that. Because it worked, wasn't a problem, didn't need thinking about. So challenge. Then there's concept extraction, where we're going along, and we go back and we say, what is the concept behind this? Can we find another way out of the concept? Example here, mayor of a small town here in Australia said, we've got a problem with commuters. They drive into the town, leave their cars parked there all day. No one can park in order to shop. Should we put in parking meters? That's expensive to install and maintain. I said, what's the concept? The concept is to allow people to realize that their parking is limited. I said, well, you could do that in a much simpler way. You can park anywhere you like, for as long as you like, provided you leave your headlights full on. Now, you're not going to leave your car there for 1 minute longer than you need to because you run your battery flat. So in certain parts of town, you just have a notice saying only headlight parking here. Then there's provocation. Provocation really upsets philosophers and logicians because provocation allows you to say something which you know is totally wrong. We call it provocation. And then you use what I call movement to move there. Once you're there, it makes sense. I'll give you a very simple example. One time I was talking to the California Ecology Department, about 500 people, and they said we have a problem with rivers flow this way, factory puts out pollution, people downstream suffer. So as a provocation, I said, suppose the factory is downstream of itself. Sounds pretty impossible. How can it be here and here at the same time? From it comes a very simple idea, which is that normally you take in your water and you put out your pollution. We legislate that if you build a factory on the river, your input must always be downstream of your own output. So you're the first to get your pollution. That is now legislation in 13 countries around the world. Very obvious. Take more care in what you put out because you are going to be the first to use it. Then there's another process. This is the last one I'm going to mention. Which is that if instead of starting here, you start somewhere else, you increase the chance of hitting that track and you can use it. You cannot choose that point because it would lie along your normal thinking, so you use chance. And the simplest way is a random word, usually a noun. Again, that upsets logicians who say if it's any word and any subject, how can it possibly work? But in a patenting system, it does work. One time, one of my trainers in South Africa, setting up a workshop one afternoon for a steel company, ISCOR, just using this technique, they generated 21,000 new ideas in one afternoon. All these processes can be learned, applied, used quite formally, quite deliberately. There's no magic, there's no mysteriousness about them. So we can develop additional habits of thinking, not instead of what we do, but in addition to what we do, to generate ideas. One final point. Again, for 2,400 years, we've used argument. A argues with B. Parallel thinking means A and B are looking in the same direction at the same time, but the directions change. And for that, we have the 6 different hats and so on, which is now very, very widely used. Last year, I was told by a Nobel Prize economist, He said, last week I was in Washington, the top economics meeting, they were using our 6 hats. Now, one final point I want to make, and then I'll stop. Many years ago, at the United Nations, I tried to set up a group to provide some additional ideas. And I had various meetings. Kofi Annan, when he was Secretary General, was at some of the meetings. Proved absolutely impossible. They said, we are not here to think, we're here to represent our countries, not to think. So that's not going to happen. So somewhere in the world there needs to be a source for new thinking, new ideas. So my project is to set up a palace of thinking, could be here in Australia, which would have 2 functions. One is to provide a platform to collect ideas from anywhere and promote the better ones. And secondly, to set up specific creative meetings to look at world issues, world problems. In other words, our existing thinking is good for recognizing past and standard situation, not good for designing new possibilities. So that's why I say that our thinking, the limits of our thinking are the biggest problem facing the world. And if we improve that, we might improve our way of dealing with climate change. Thank you.
So there you have the end of today's topic about critical thinking. The idea that by using simple tools, mind mapping, asking questions, Edward de Bono 6 thinking hats, you can learn to be creative, you can learn to address problems, you can learn many, many aspects to help improve your personal growth. Okay? So for today, I'll stop the recording there. There you go.